In 1879, in a small fog-choked town, a woman named Clara Whitmore began to speak of things no one could understand. She claimed the dead whispered through her womb, carrying the names, secrets, and final regrets of those long gone. Villagers dismissed her as deluded, yet the accuracy of her claims grew impossible to ignore. The sick, the dying, the long dead, they all seemed to speak through her in moments of hushed terror. The midwife and local doctor were both unsettled, finding themselves listening to Clara's murmurs late at night, unable to discern whether they were hearing prophecy, madness, or a power that had lingered among the living and the dead. And as word spread, a question haunted the town. Could a woman truly bear the voice of the dead, or had something far darker chosen her womb as its vessel? In 1879, the Whitmore family arrived in a quiet, fog-laden township, hoping for a fresh start far from the shadows of their past. Clara Whitmore, barely 24, walked the cobblestone streets with an awareness that unsettled even the townsfolk accustomed to superstition and whispers of death. Her dark hair, often tangled from the winter wind, framed a pale face that seemed too still, too knowing. Those who first glimpsed her noted her gaze lingered longer than necessary, as if she were listening to voices no one else could hear. The scent of damp earth and faint decay seemed to cling to her, a subtle reminder that Clara's presence carried more than youth and frailty. It carried a burden unseen. Her family's modest home, with its wooden shutters and uneven floorboards, became the first place the whispers began. Clara would sit for hours by the hearth, rocking slightly, murmuring names that had no relevance to the living. At first, her mother dismissed the murmurs as the eccentricities of a sensitive girl. Her father worried openly, muttering about curses and the weight of family sins. Yet the townspeople grew curious, drawn by tales of Clara's strange attentiveness to the invisible. When she described the death of a merchant who had perished years before, the precise details, how he had collapsed, the exact time, even the scent of the tobacco he had smoked, left witnesses uneasy. Even children sensed the difference. Where others played freely, they avoided her small frame, whispering to each other about the girl who spoke with ghosts. Local midwives who visited the home noted an unusual quality to Clara's voice, a resonance that seemed to emanate not from her lips alone, but from somewhere deeper, closer to her womb. They exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if the sounds were natural or something far older and more powerful. As the town's curiosity deepened, fear began to take root. Windows were left open less often, lanterns stayed lit longer, and families spoke in hushed tones about the girl who seemed to see beyond the living. Some dismissed her as mad, others believed she had been chosen, marked in some way by death itself. And as winter's fog pressed against the shuttered homes, a quiet question lingered over every hearth. Could the dead truly speak through a living woman? Or was Clara's innocence merely a veil over something far more sinister? If someone in your town began whispering the secrets of the dead, would you fear them or listen? Tell me in the comments. Not long after Clara settled into the town, the whispers began to take form. At first they were soft murmurs, half heard in the dead of night when the wind rattled shutters and fog pressed against the streets. Clara spoke alone in her room, rocking gently, her lips moving as if translating voices from another world. Neighbors who passed her home at twilight sometimes paused, certain they heard a child speaking in a language they could almost understand, though no one else could decipher the words. The midwives who visited noted an unusual warmth in her womb, a vibration that seemed to carry the faint timbre of voices not her own. Then came the first undeniable revelation. Clara whispered the name of a man who had died decades before in the town's only smallpox epidemic. She described the exact room he had been in, the position of his hands, and even the pallor of his skin, as death claimed him. When town elders investigated, they found her account uncannily precise. The story spread quickly, traveling down alleys, across markets, and into homes. Fear followed curiosity, a heavy fog pressing on every heart. People began to wonder if the dead truly spoke through her, and if so, whether they spoke warnings or judgments. Soon, Clara's murmurs began to foretell events yet to come. She whispered a name of a child who would fall gravely ill, the day she would grow feverish, even the very candle that would burn too close to her crib. Families began locking doors and keeping watch, yet her words were never wrong. Townsfolk were torn between dread and fascination. Some avoided her entirely, refusing to know what the dead had whispered through her womb. Others, compelled by morbid curiosity, followed her nightly, listening for the next prediction, unable to resist the pull of the unknown. Even those skeptical of superstition began to fear her presence. The town's doctor, a rational man, confessed that he could neither explain nor ignore her accuracy. Midwives whispered to one another that she carried not just life within her, but the voices of those who could not rest. And as night descended over the fog-drenched streets, the air seemed heavier, almost alive with the dead she carried. If a woman could carry the whispers of the dead inside her, would you seek her out or hide? Could you face the secrets she might speak about your family? Tell me in the comments, would you dare to listen or run from the truth? As Clara's whispers grew clearer, the townsfolk began to realize she did not merely recount deaths, they carried secrets. She spoke of lives hidden behind polite facades, of sins long buried, of betrayals and tragedies no one dared acknowledge. One evening at the town square, she murmured the name of a woman who had vanished years earlier, describing the precise manner of her disappearance, the day it had occurred, and even the scent lingering in the empty house. Those who had known the story, relatives, neighbors, and friends, were left shivering, unable to dismiss what she had said. Families began to notice her uncanny attentiveness. She lingered near certain homes, her gaze fixed, her voice low. Sometimes she would hum almost inaudibly, recounting details of lives that had ended quietly, tragically, or mysteriously. The midwives noted that the rhythm of her murmurs often matched the heartbeat of her unborn child, as if the voices themselves were echoing through the womb, creating a resonance no one could ignore. The air in the Whitmore household grew heavy, carrying faint scents of decay and old incense, reminders of deaths long past. Even the town's elders, who prided themselves on knowledge and rationality, began to seek her counsel. They would approach her hesitantly, asking about ancestors whose deaths had been deemed shameful or forgotten. Clara never offered judgment. She simply relayed the information, her voice steady and unflinching. Yet the effect was undeniable. Secrets that had been buried for decades surfaced, leaving families to reckon with guilt, grief, and unresolved histories. The town itself seemed to shift in her presence. Streets that had once echoed with market chatter and church bells became quieter, more introspective. Windows were shut tighter, doors locked more firmly. Even the fog seemed to thicken around her, curling through alleys as though carrying the voices she repeated. People whispered to each other, asking whether the dead themselves had chosen her, whether she had become a vessel for a city's collective memory, or something far darker, beyond comprehension. If someone could reveal the hidden truths of your family, would you hear them or turn away? Could you face the secrets of the past without fear or denial? Tell me in the comments, would you confront the truth or hide behind closed doors? By late spring of 1879, the town could no longer ignore Clara Whitmore's presence. Her whispers had become more than curiosities. They were warnings. Families reported small but chilling coincidences. A neighbor's candle tipping over exactly as she had murmured. A horse-drawn carriage accident she had described the night before. A fever striking a child whose name she had spoken softly in her rocking chair. Her voice carried with uncanny clarity, almost musical, yet impossible to trace to mere imagination. The dead, she claimed, were pressing urgent messages through her, seeking acknowledgement, resolution, or vengeance. The town's reaction was divided. Some sought her guidance, desperate to avert tragedies, to prepare for what was inevitable. Others recoiled, locking doors and drawing curtains, afraid that listening too closely might invite disaster. Yet her murmurs never faltered. She described not only names but precise circumstances, the angle of a door left ajar, the subtle scent of smoke before a fire, the pale hue of a fevered face hours before it struck. Even skeptics could not deny her accuracy, and a sense of inevitability settled over the township like a heavy fog. At night the fog thickened, and Clara's presence seemed to magnify it. Midwives and neighbors reported hearing faint echoes of her words in empty rooms, the murmur of names carried through hallways, resonating from somewhere deep within her womb. Some believed the unborn child itself was a conduit, a vessel linking the living and the dead, amplifying the knowledge she carried. Families whispered prayers into the corners of their homes, hoping to protect themselves from both revelation and fate. Yet even as dread spread, a curious fascination gripped many. People began following her discreetly, watching her pace quietly along the streets, listening for her next whisper. They noted her unchanging calm, the way she seemed to absorb grief and history without visible emotion, as though she alone bore the burden of the town's secrets. Every word she spoke pressed the citizens to confront truths long denied, challenging their faith, courage, and understanding of life and death. If someone could foretell danger and reveal hidden tragedies with perfect clarity, would you seek their counsel or avoid them entirely? Could you bear to hear the names of those you loved before misfortune struck? Tell me in the comments, would you heed her warnings or turn away and hope for the best? By midsummer of 1879, the town's quiet streets had become a battleground of fear and fascination. Clara Whitmore's whispers, once dismissed as eccentricity, now dictated the rhythm of daily life. Some townsfolk treated her as a prophet, hanging on every word, following her from house to house, praying that heedful attention might avert disaster. Others recoiled in terror, refusing to even glance at her, barricading windows and doors against the perceived power she carried within her womb. A once unified community, now fractured along the lines of belief and skepticism, and every step Clara took seemed to widen the chasm. The division reached the homes of the wealthy merchants first. Some families openly sought her counsel, pleading for insight into illnesses, accidents, and hidden dangers. Others, prideful and fearful, shunned her, even going so far as to remove their children from the streets and forbid servants from listening to her murmurs. Public gatherings, once lively with debate and music, became tense affairs. Whispers of death and fate followed Clara wherever she went. Her presence alone could silence a crowded hall, her soft voice drawing the attention of all who heard it. The town's clergy debated whether she was a vessel of divine warning or a tool of something darker. Ministers counseled caution and prayer, warning their congregations against blindly trusting the words of a young woman. Physicians, bound by rationality and science, struggled to reconcile her accuracy with reason. Even children felt the shift. Play stopped when Clara entered the square, and whispers of the dead spoken through her permeated their imagination. Friendships strained, and neighbors became wary of one another, uncertain who might heed her or ignore her, or worse, fall victim to what she foretold. Yet amidst fear, fascination persisted. Some citizens felt compelled to follow her nightly, witnessing her soft murmurs in the dim light of lanterns, watching as she lingered near houses where deaths were yet to come. Her calm, unwavering demeanor only heightened the tension. A young woman, seemingly powerless, wielded a truth the entire town could not escape. If your town suddenly split between those who feared and those who followed a single person, where would you stand? Would you protect her, condemn her, or hide entirely? Tell me in the comments. How far would you go to survive in a town where whispers of the dead divide friend from friend? By late summer, the town's unease had deepened beyond fear of Clara's whispers alone. Strange occurrences began to accompany her presence. Windows left ajar slammed without wind, doors creaked in empty homes, and lanterns flickered even in rooms untouched by draught. Some claimed faint voices echoed Clara's murmurs, a chorus of whispers that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Midwives noted that her womb, where the unborn child lay, pulsed subtly as if attuned to something invisible, a conduit linking the living and the dead. Neighbors reported that her nighttime murmurs were often accompanied by shadows moving unnaturally across walls. Servants spoke of objects displaced inexplicably after her visits. A chair shifted, a kettle overturned, a shawl draped in a corner as though someone had passed unseen. Even the riverbank, usually quiet at night, carried unfamiliar sounds, soft footsteps in the fog, distant sighs, and the occasional thud of a small object hitting the water. People began to suspect that the child she carried was more than human, a vessel for something neither wholly alive nor wholly dead. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered that the voices in Clara's womb were spirits of those wronged, unable to find rest, seeking acknowledgement or justice. Others suggested that she had been chosen by forces older than the town itself, bound to reveal the secrets the living tried to ignore. Families became increasingly vigilant, staying indoors long after sunset, lighting candles in every room, and crossing themselves when passing Clara in the streets. Yet for all the fear, curiosity persisted. A few brave or morbidly fascinated townsfolk followed her discreetly, listening as she murmured names and events with unwavering clarity. The patterns she revealed were too precise to ignore, and every whisper carried the weight of inevitability. Even the most rational residents began questioning reality itself. How could one young woman carry knowledge that defied both science and reason? If someone you believed could commune with the dead moved among your town, would you flee or follow? Could you face the unseen forces she might awaken, or would fear overwhelm your courage? Tell me in the comments. Would you seek the truth or hide in ignorance? By autumn of 1879, the town's attention had turned to Clara Whitmore, in ways both reverent and fearful. Among those most drawn and most troubled was the local midwife Margaret Linton, a woman seasoned by decades of births and deaths. Margaret had witnessed the fragility of life countless times, yet nothing had prepared her for Clara. Rumors of whispers emanating from the woman's womb had reached her ears, stories of unborn voices echoing the dead. Skeptical yet cautious, Margaret resolved to test the phenomenon herself, hoping to determine whether Clara was merely imaginative or an unwitting conduit for something beyond comprehension. Margaret arranged to observe Clara during a quiet afternoon. She entered the Whitmore home, lantern in hand, the winter sun dimming behind heavy clouds. Clara sat by the hearth, small and still, her hands resting gently on her abdomen. The room seemed to grow colder as Margaret approached, the faint scent of damp earth and faint decay clinging to the air. Clara's lips moved softly, murmuring in a tone that was nearly inaudible but resonant, almost melodic. Margaret strained to hear, realizing the words were coherent, precise, and filled with names of the recently deceased. The midwife's curiosity deepened into apprehension when Clara began describing events Margaret knew firsthand. The untimely death of a sailor, the fever that had claimed a neighbor's child, the quiet passing of an elderly widow. Details flowed from Clara effortlessly, the position of the bodies, the subtle sounds in the room at the time of death, even the lingering odors of illness or smoke. Margaret felt a shiver run through her spine. The accuracy was impossible, a certainty beyond observation, beyond intuition. Margaret realized then that Clara's murmurs were more than prediction. They were communication. The unborn child within her seemed to amplify the voices, resonating with the collective memory of those who had died and could not rest. The implications were staggering. Life and death intertwined through one young woman, a living vessel for the stories of the dead. Margaret, ever rational, found her faith challenged, caught between skepticism and awe. If you were in Margaret's place, observing something that defied reason, would you document it or turn away in fear? Could you face a truth that challenged everything you believed about life and death? Tell me in the comments, would you seek to understand or close your eyes to the impossible? By the onset of winter in 1879, Clara Whitmore's presence had transformed the town into a place of quiet tension and muted dread. Her whispers no longer remained confined to her home. They spread through the streets, reaching those brave or foolish enough to listen. Families shuttered windows and kept lanterns lit throughout the night, anxious that her words might forewarn tragedies within their own walls. The town's fog-draped streets seemed heavier now, each creaking shutter or distant footstep magnified by the collective anxiety. Even the oldest residents, long accustomed to illness, shipwrecks, and death, admitted a shiver at the mere mention of Clara's name. The town itself began to divide irreparably. Some saw her as a prophetess, a vessel chosen to reveal truths no one else could bear. They sought her guidance, following her through alleyways and across the riverbank, hoping that her whispers could spare them from misfortune. Others viewed her as a curse, a harbinger of doom whose very presence marked households for tragedy. Fences were reinforced, children were kept indoors, and hushed prayers echoed from every hearth. Even casual conversations stopped abruptly when her small figure approached. Her reputation alone carried a weight of inevitability. Merchants argued in candlelit parlors, ministers preached of divine tests, and physicians debated the limits of reason. Yet despite their fear and rational attempts to explain her, Clara remained calm, almost serene, as if the burden of her knowledge were a responsibility she bore without complaint. She walked the streets with the same slow, deliberate pace, her eyes absorbing the city's tension, while her murmurs traced the stories of those departed. The town seemed to hold its breath around her, as if the air itself acknowledged her authority over life, death, and memory. Even the fog appeared to respond to her presence, curling more thickly along the river and around lampposts where she lingered, carrying the faint scent of earth and decay that had always followed her. Her whispers began to feel like a city-wide heartbeat, a pulse of inevitability that no one could ignore. If someone in your town could predict death and reveal secrets of the past, would you fear them or follow them relentlessly? Could you endure knowing the truth of what was to come? Tell me in the comments, would you confront the warning or hide in your home hoping it passes unnoticed? As winter deepened in 1879, Clara Whitmore's whispers became both legend and terror. The townsfolk had grown accustomed to her quiet presence, yet each murmur carried a gravity that left hearts racing and palms damp with fear. It was said that she no longer spoke only of the past. Now she predicted events yet to come, detailing the circumstances of illness, accident, and death with an unsettling precision. Even the most skeptical citizens began to keep their ears open, drawn by an instinct that defied reason. Knowing the future, however grim, had become a compulsion. One evening, a particularly sharp frost coated the streets. Clara wandered near the town square, her eyes distant, lips moving in low melodic murmurs. She spoke names that would fall ill in the coming week, described the subtle accidents awaiting neighbors, and whispered warnings that seemed impossible to ignore. Parents clutched their children, merchants checked locks thrice, and even the town council paused in disbelief. There was no malice in Clara's tone, only a quiet authority, as if she were translating the dead's intent, delivering messages they could no longer carry themselves. The midwife, Margaret Linton, who had long studied Clara's phenomenon, observed her with growing reverence. She noted how the unborn child seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the whispers, amplifying the voices of those departed. It was as though life and death had converged in one fragile body, and the town itself trembled under the weight of that convergence. Every prediction came with nuance, the creak of a floorboard, the chill of a draught, the scent of smoke or decay, forcing listeners to confront the vivid reality of events they could not yet witness. Rumors began to spread that Clara had become a vessel not only for knowledge but for judgment. The dead, it was whispered, used her voice to remind the living of misdeeds long ignored, of promises broken and of inevitability that could not be escaped. Some fled their homes at night, fearing her murmurs. Others, compelled by morbid fascination, followed quietly to hear the next revelation. If someone could speak the exact fate of those around you, would you listen or close your ears in terror? Could you bear the finality of their words? Tell me in the comments, would you seek the last whispers or hide, hoping the dead remain silent? By early spring of 1880, Clara Whitmore had become both the heart and the shadow of the town. Her whispers had revealed the hidden tragedies of the past, predicted accidents and illnesses, and unsettled even the most rational minds. Yet behind the calm exterior, a profound question weighed on her. How long could she carry the voices of the dead without losing herself? Each murmur echoed not only through the town, but through her very being, weaving the lives, deaths, and secrets of countless souls into her flesh and the life growing within her womb. One evening, alone in her chamber, Clara pressed her hands to her abdomen. The voices were louder than ever, overlapping, urgent, and pleading. She could feel them in the rhythm of her pulse, in the subtle movements of the unborn child, as if both mother and child had become vessels for a history no one else could bear. The whispers demanded acknowledgement, demanded that the living heed what they had been too slow to recognize. Yet each revelation brought with it a heavy price: fear, grief, and suspicion in the hearts of the townsfolk. Clara realized she faced a choice. She could continue to bear the burden, allowing the dead to speak through her, shaping the living by knowledge that terrified as much as it informed. Or she could retreat, silence herself, and live as any woman might, leaving the town to navigate its own shadows, but at the cost of abandoning those who might otherwise learn, prepare, or reconcile. The gravity of her decision was immense, yet she bore it with quiet dignity, understanding that life and death often demanded sacrifices beyond comprehension. Over the following days, Clara acted with deliberate restraint. She chose whom to speak to, which warnings to share, and when to remain silent. Families who had feared her now approached cautiously, while those who sought guidance still followed her, listening for insights that could save or doom. The town, though unsettled, began to accept her as both messenger and guardian, a living reminder that the past and future are never fully separate. If you carried knowledge of life and death beyond what anyone else could bear, what choice would you make? Would you reveal the truths, or protect yourself and the living by silence? Tell me in the comments. If you were Clara, how would you decide? By the summer of 1880, Clara Whitmore had left an indelible mark on the town. Though she eventually departed quietly, her whispers lingered in memory, echoing through the fog-laden streets, shuttered homes, and weathered faces of those who had listened. Families spoke of her with a mixture of awe and fear, recounting with precision the revelations she had shared, the deaths foretold, the secrets uncovered, the warnings heeded or ignored. Even long after she was gone, the town seemed to carry her presence in the creak of a floorboard, the flicker of a lantern, the cold draught that crept through alleys at night. Clara's legacy was not simply in the knowledge she conveyed, but in the profound effect it had on those who remained. The townsfolk had learned to confront what they had previously ignored: unresolved grief, hidden sins, and the delicate line between life and death. They were haunted, yes, but also transformed. The whispers she carried within her womb had forced the living to reckon with mortality in a way no sermon, physician, or law could achieve. Parents, once fearful of her, now quietly recalled the precise warnings she had given, often acting on them without acknowledgement, as if honoring her guidance in silence. Historians who later examined the town's records found curious anomalies: deaths that matched Clara's whispered predictions, letters describing secrets she had revealed, and journals documenting her calm, unyielding presence. Scholars debated whether she had a gift, a curse, or a power that defied understanding entirely. Yet even the most rational could not deny the account's consistency. To the town, Clara Whitmore became both legend and cautionary tale, a woman through whom the dead spoke, whose child may have carried the resonance of the past forward, and whose presence reshaped an entire community. Generations later, the streets still seemed to remember her footsteps. Tourists and locals alike noted the weight of history in the fog, sensing the unseen, perhaps the echo of voices once carried within one woman. Clara's story remained a reminder. The past is never silent, and the living often live under the shadow of the dead, whether they acknowledge it or not. If someone could bear the voices of those long gone, shaping a town's fate with whispered truths, would you listen, or turn away in fear? Tell me in the comments, do you believe Clara's whispers were a gift, a curse, or something far older beyond comprehension?